Hi, everybody. Welcome to Using Payments Data to Understand and Anticipate Consumer Needs. My name is Damian Rollison. I'm VP of Product at Universal Business Listing and a columnist for Street Fight. My area of expertise is not payments, but I was interested in preparing for this panel and speaking to the panelists who are certainly noted experts in that area about the convergence between local search and payments just on a conceptual level. When you think about it, payments are really about as local as you can get. We're talking about a specific consumer in a specific location buying a specific product or service at a specific time. It's micro-local. And it's also, from many of our points of view, perhaps rather mundane in the sense that we do this every day. We swipe our credit cards at a card reader machine at a store, or maybe touchlessly with Apple Pay, or whatever the case may be. And we think of that as a mundane transaction that doesn't have a lot of meaning. On the consumer side, we might see aggregated data that American Express might give us showing trends in spending on a monthly basis that helps us to plan for budgeting and so on. But looking at that same data from the perspective of the small business or the multi-location brand is something that's pretty interesting. And even the companies, as we'll probably hear, that have been important in the space of managing and processing payments for years didn't necessarily turn their attention to looking at what the data was actually telling them or could potentially tell them that would provide useful insights to businesses in order to make marketing decisions, sales decisions, inventory decisions, and also to build engagement with consumers. So that's some of what we'll be getting into today on our panel. If you guys don't mind, I'd like to go ahead and start with letting you each introduce yourselves, tell a little bit about your own background, and then say something, if you don't mind, about how your company sits within the payments space. Krish, if you don't mind starting.
Sure. Thank you, Damien. Hi, I'm Krish Mantripragada. So I run the data analytics team at First Data. First Data is, some of you may or may not know, is the largest payment processor and multi-channel commerce company in the world. And so we serve over 4.5 million merchants in the US and 6 worldwide, ranging all the way from the small mom and pop coffee shops at one end of the spectrum to the largest of the retailers you can think of at the other end of the spectrum, and everyone in between. So a way to think about this is that we also have another side of our business, which is more focused on financial institutions, but I think for today's discussion, we'll keep the topic closer to the merchant side. So for any given merchant that we process for, we essentially see all their transactions. We also have a point of sale solution where we essentially get visibility into the entire SKU level data as well as cash and that type of stuff. So I joined the company a couple of years ago. So my background is in consumer marketing, supply chain. I spent pretty much all my career in the enterprise software space. So the payments industry is relatively new to me as well. But the data set and what you can do with it is what attracted me to the field, and look forward to sharing some of our thoughts there.
Excellent. Thanks, Krish. Marc, if you'd like to go ahead. On switch on the bottom.
Did that work?
Oh, sorry.
Great. Okay. Thanks.
Yours is different.
So I'm a co-founder and CEO at a company called Index. We're about 3 years old now. Most of our team comes from Google, from Apple, from Oracle. And actually, my co-founder was one of the guys who started Google Wallet, and I was the lead on the product side there. And when we first got Wallet off the ground, it was really about, really pausing to think how Google could extend its advertising business offline. If you think about really the core innovation of Google with AdWords, it's that you knew the value of your ads almost for the first time. And that's kind of what's true of all e-commerce, right? Like, you can measure stuff. You can count new and returning customers. You can actually understand the impact of running an ad, how many people see it, click on it, come to your site, and actually convert. And if you come from the online world and you start working offline in retail, there's not a lot of data. You do some ads and you wonder, what really had the impact? And so, some people call it payments data. I think that's fair. I just think of it as conversion data. We need to understand sort of the impact of something if we're going to know how we got there. And so we started Index about 3 years ago, and we're working with enterprise scale retailers. So really 100 plus stores, $1 billion plus in revenue. And we help them to bring that kind of measurement of e-commerce into their stores to measure the effectiveness of their advertising, really collect an understanding of each customer who comes in, use that data to do better targeting. We think that sort of transaction history is very predictive, but also measure the impact. So First Data is actually a great partner of ours. We integrate to point of sale, and we see the transaction first, including the SKU data, before handing it off to First Data that does the processing with most of our retailers. So they collect the $50. We understand what's actually in your basket and use that data for targeting, for better experiences, but also when we deliver targeting, we understand the impact because we're integrated to the end of that funnel. So hopefully that's a little bit of context, and sure, we've got a lot to talk about.
We do. Thanks, Marc, for that introduction. That was very helpful. So, so when people talk today about payments, a lot of the conversation is around how you can build engagement on top of payments information. So loyalty campaigns, I think, is one of your focuses, Marc, but there are also ties to online search, to social networking, to other types of consumer activities. But before we kind of get into that, which I'd like to, it's actually kind of fascinating to talk about, a lot of those things are about a future that might not completely be here yet. We had a survey a minute ago about how many stores had actually implemented beacon technology. I think we all understand the potential of that, but it might not be quite a reality. But what is a reality every day is people swiping their cards. There's a lot of transactional data that you guys are compiling on a daily basis. And just to start with the model of a single store, I think it would be interesting for people to hear what are some of the insights that a single store can gain by looking at a consumer's transaction history over time or multiple consumers over time. What are some insights that a store can gain from that type of analysis? Krish, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. And there are two answers to that. So one, if you think about it from a small business perspective, and then you think about it from a large national merchant perspective that also has a local play. So when we started thinking about this problem, right, so if you look at most small businesses don't even have a clear sense of what's happening in their business on a daily, weekly, hourly basis. So we focus our energy on helping them understand the core truth in terms of what is really happening in your business, what are your hotspots, how are you doing on a daily, weekly, hourly basis, was today better than yesterday, helping them understand their customers, who are your customers, where do they come from, what type of attributes do they exhibit, what do new guys buy versus return customers come in, how are you doing? It's also helping them understand a given particular business or store, but also put that in context of the overall network. Given the fact that we see so many of merchants spread across the country, also leverage the data set for the entire marketplace to put in work for every single merchant, so that if you're having a bad day, is it just you or is it everybody else in the market? What type of wallet share do you have in your category, in your region? What are the spending patterns? If you're a restaurant, you want to understand, do people, how often do people in this neighborhood go out to eat, et cetera, et cetera. Why is all this important? Because at the end of the day, a small merchant does a lot of things in terms of running their operations, running their staff, doing various types of marketing outreach programs. And SMB typically spends 7-8% of their annual sales on various we all still get Val packs in our mail. It's still happening, right? And that costs money, right? So providing context to a lot of those decisions, payments data is actually very, very powerful because it conveys not what people say they do, but what people do. And there's a lot of interesting things that you can gather from that to provide context so that they can better spend their money.
And you can frame that in different ways, right? You can talk about a particular consumer's spend patterns across multiple stores in the same vertical. You can define neighborhoods or cities and so on. It's all just a matter of how you want to use the data.
That's right. So now going back to the second part that I was mentioning earlier, right? So often the kinds of questions we get is you're now going to the larger nationals that have a local presence, right? They've got stores spread across the country. Some are doing great, some are not doing so well. And most of them have an inside-out view in terms of, John runs that region. He's an outstanding, regional sales manager. He's got a very good staff. They run their operations very well. Hence, but often what happens is there are a lot of local factors. The kinds of people that visit a downtown location are very different from those who visit a suburban location. The competitive profile around it, the share of wallet, the spending patterns are very, very different. And so having that intelligence in terms of the awareness of both consumer as well as the local effects greatly influences what you do as a business in terms of how you run it and reach your customers. So that's the other aspect of it.
Right, okay. So Marc, your focus is more on the multi-location brands and especially particular verticals, which maybe you could talk about a little bit, why those verticals and also what kinds of information are interesting to aggregate across multiple locations, as Krish was talking about. Do you have something to add there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the challenge is that today most retailers manage their business by looking at revenue. Now, that may not seem like a challenge, of course. You should track how much you sold today. But that's only part of the picture. And so we were discussing a little bit, but I thought it was interesting. It was probably 30 years ago, there was a Wall Street analyst who said, hey, everybody, it's not enough to just report revenue. You built a whole bunch of new stores this year, so break it out for me. How do you attribute revenue to those new stores versus your same stores? What are same store sales year over year? What are your comp store sales? Which is kind of a fair way to look at it. You know, I get you built new things, but really, how are you performing year over year? And that's kind of the metric in retail today. But that's still a revenue metric. That's not a customer metric. And so a conversation recently with kind of a big national quick service chain, they had just reported in their earnings, they're a public company, same store sales grew 6.2%. Sounds good, you're growing, cool, like it. We asked, you know, how did you do it? They said, you know, fresh ingredients. We said, okay, I mean, I love your food, I like your brand, but let me be more specific. You grew 6%. Did it come from new customers coming for the very first time or existing customers grabbing an extra meal? They had no idea. They just had no idea. And I think, again, really coming from like an online context, if you don't know how you grew 6%, how are you going to do it again or 10x? They were monitoring the revenue, but they weren't counting the customers. They counted transactions, but not unique people. And credit card data provides a way to do that. Most retailers today, certainly in light of all of the security stuff going on, they're kind of almost afraid of credit card data, and rightly so, they throw it away. But then they wind up with these transaction logs that have no IDs, no customer understanding. A lot of retailers try to solve it with a loyalty program. They'll go in and say, okay, you must provide a secondary ID. What we do at Index is we look at payment cards as a primary ID. And if you treat it the right way, it's a very strong form of authentication. And so I think that by measuring customer health, you get a very different picture of your business. With one partner, we asked them, you know, what's frequency? And they said, you know, it's one or it's a few times a week. People come in here all the time. For them, we found out that frequency was only a few times a year. They were a totally different business than they thought. They were almost more of a specialty business. Looking at the revenue, it was just good all the time, but it didn't tell the customer story. All they had before that was surveys. And so what we help to do is really provide a customer view, really a view of the health of the customer base, and from there, then change how they market.
Now, just to go back to the story about the store that increased revenue by 6.2%, you're trying to look at payments data as a way to correlate that with other factors. Isn't it challenging to figure out which factors are relevant and which aren't? I mean, can it be weather or seasonal or sales or whatever the factor might be? How do you find the right viewpoint into the data?
Well, there are a lot of different ways to look, but really, I think the challenge is today, the primary way to look is based on dollars. And we think that the primary way to look should be based around customers. Mm-hmm. You should know how many new customers came in for the first time today. The extension is then you need to figure out what drove those new customers in and how can you repeat that marketing which was effective in getting them. But if you're not even counting or understanding the share of new versus returning customers, I mean, today if the stat is sort of same store sales, we really think the stat going forward should be same customer sales. That's what analysts on Wall Street should be asking about. But they don't ask because they know that retailers out there, for the most part, just don't know.
So that's why the connection to loyalty, although that's kind of the next step after, because you don't even need loyalty if you're just analyzing the data, right? Yeah. So, Krish, your company has pretty recently launched a product that's focused more on the SMB market, I believe in Cytix. If you could talk about that a little bit and how that's maybe different from the multi-location model, and what are you trying to do for the SMB as far as analyzing payments?
Yeah, so for the SMB, right, so we spoke to a lot of them, we worked with a lot of them, and as I was mentioning earlier, it all came down to like solving three basic problems for them. So one is helping them really understand their business performance on a continuous basis so that you expose the risks and opportunities in their business. So like some businesses are focused on attracting new customers. Some are more focused on retaining the ones that you have. Some where I don't have a problem attracting new customers, I just got to get them to spend more. So there's an average ticket size problem. Helping a merchant understand what to focus on that is going to move the needle for them. That's the first problem we solved. And the next one is helping them understand their customers themselves. Where do they come from? Most merchants don't have an idea where their customers come from and what region should you be targeting, or what types of attributes do they exhibit, et cetera. So the second piece is to help them understand their customer base. And all of this is important so that they can, again, contextualize the spend that they're doing. Like, there are lots of things that a small merchant does that only a small merchant knows. How often have we seen like a guy with a sign standing outside trying to attract crowd coming in? All of that costs money. So did that work? Did that not work? Because at the end of the day, no matter what the merchant does, it all shows up at the point of sale. Did you get new customers? Did you get existing? Did the ticket sizes go up? Did the revenues go up? And did you drive repeat behavior? So there are a few handful of metrics that are sort of, at the end of the day, that's what matter. And so what we do is we generate insights at scale for millions of merchants that are very, very pertinent for that particular merchant at that particular point in time. Because the thing that you're competing with when you're an SMB is time. Most merchants don't have any time, and so for them it's got to be simple, it's got to be relevant, and that's the solution that we launched.
Are you talking about analysis that's about planning for the future or analyzing the past, or is there real-time analysis as well? Can you be pinged with information that's relevant to you right now today?
It's all of the above. So I'll give you an example in each of the category, right? So the first category, which is more historical analysis, that is to give you an idea of who your customers are, where they come from, that type of stuff, all the stuff that I just discussed. The real-time nature is about you're running a campaign, you're promoting certain products, what's happening right now while the campaign is still in progress. Because if you think about this, the payments data is pretty much real, if not near real time, and you can course correct your campaigns as they're going on, where you didn't anticipate, you didn't anticipate the campaign to be as successful as it turned out to be, and so you can course correct and make adjustments as you go. The third piece is forward-looking. It is projections. Given that if you look at customer behavior and neighborhood behavior and, of course, sales data, and we also bring in a lot of third-party data like weather and those types of things for seasonality effects, you can project and you can forecast what their business is going to look like for the next 10, 15, 20 days. And a lot of merchants have even asked us, can you set a goal for me? What should I be aiming for, especially given that you see all Chinese restaurants in the neighborhood? I'm also a Chinese restaurant. What should I be aspiring for? If I make $1,000 today, is that great, or is that I should be aiming for 2,000? So that's the future-looking forecasting predictive aspect of it, and it's all of the above.
Does the application as it's used by SMBs today require any consumer engagement at all? Does the consumer get involved?
So actually, no. In fact, because the beauty of this is there's no hardware, there's no software, there's no implementation. By virtue of just doing and running their business, given the fact that payments data is a continuous process, we can provide this as a service to the merchants, and they don't have to change anything that they're doing currently. Now, if there is consumer engagement, it just takes it to a whole new level, because going back to what we talked about is if there's loyalty that your consumers are participating in. Mm-hmm. The problem with a lot of the loyalty programs is that it's a slice of your customer base. It's not your entire customer base. But you can learn a lot from that slice, and obviously the goal is to convert the rest of the guys also to become. If they do digital receipts, a little bit more about them. If they have if they have signed off on some of your campaigns, a little bit more about them. So you collect bits and pieces of data about the consumers over time, and that just increases more understanding, and you can put a name and a face to the consumer if of course all consented through the consumer. That just increases the engagement to a whole new level, because now the merchant has a context of how to engage, when to engage, where to engage, those types of things.
So if you're able to win consumer engagement, at least the customers who are willing to participate in that are going to give you a sort of higher value to your data. So Marc, I kind of wanted to turn to, as I understand it, Index has a couple of different visions for how to interact with consumers. One of them has no interaction with the consumer at all, and then you're building a loyalty level, and then there's sort of a vision of the future, which is kind of based on the Amazon model. And is that something that you can talk to?
Yeah, I think a challenge generally with analytics is sometimes they can become kind of academic. I think they can inform you about your business, but we've seen it, whether you're a small business or whether you're a really large one, someone tells you something and you all sit around and you say, okay, cool, now what? We now know that average frequency is once a week. Cool, we thought it was different. How is that actually going to change my business? What action do I take? It's important to know, but if you think about sort of the Google model, analytics actually isn't the business. AdWords is the business. Analytics proves the value of AdWords, which is the way you take action. And so kind of the focus for us is actually on a set of campaign tools. We put in place the customer health metrics, but then we do a really, really deep point of sale integration for two reasons. The first is that generally kind of the payment stream sees how many dollars you spent, but not what you bought. So if you look at your bank statement, you see like $50, $100 at Macy's, they don't know you bought shoes. We want to know what you bought because that's the way we can really do something personalized. That's why we do the point of sale integration. But the second piece is actually to facilitate opt-in or sign up from the customer. So to begin, we have really robust data across every transaction, including that product level info. That's why we do the point of sale integration. But then we ask customers to sign up. In some cases, it's would you like an email receipt? In other cases, it's would you like to sign up for a loyalty program? But the idea is then we establish consent. We want to be really respectful, and opt-in to really communicate back with the customer. We have two goals. One, we really want to drive kind of share of wallet, so drive revenue. And two, we want to improve margins. And so I think really two great stats there. If you look at Amazon, they generate 35% of their revenue from product recommendations. Just the sidebar, the bottom bar, the emails they send you are over a third of their revenue. So if we know what you bought, we can get you to buy more. And we can do it in a way that's respectful. I think that when you share your data in a retail environment, it's actually the retailer's responsibility to remember your preferences. I think like my counter example, if you think about like calling up an 800 number and you pin in your phone number and you like wait 5 minutes and you get a rep who's like, hi, what's your phone number? You're like, I hate this company. I just gave you my data expecting a better, faster experience and you totally failed me. I think when you shop, it's actually very personal. And remembering is actually respectful if you have consent from the customer. So we want to remember what you like, to recommend the right things, and then price them in the right way. So if you look at someone like The Gap, last year they sold about $22 billion worth of clothing. But their revenue was $15 billion. So Gap discounted $7 billion off the ticket price to their actual revenue. Now, in clothing you discount, but that's pretty extreme because for them it's mostly like 40% off everything, every other week, something like that. And if you have good data, you can do something much more nuanced. You can say, oh, you already buy jeans. Why don't I be more strategic? I'll give you 40% off the premium jeans you don't buy, upsell you, or 40% off the jacket you never buy at The Gap to cross-sell you. So really kind of our campaign tools are focused on taking the data, getting customer opt-in, and then communicating to really drive revenue in the form of recommendations, but also to drive margin by pricing things in the right way. And I don't mean some magical changing of the price, but actually potentially giving you an individual incentive and measuring, of course, the performance and redemption of that back through your next transaction.
You're also looking, though, into a future where there's kind of a brand experience on your app that actually engages with you while you're in the store as well. Is that right? Knows that you're there, checks you in silently, feeds you offers and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so we provide a technology platform for our retail partners. So something Krish mentioned is being able to provide insight kind of across the market. You know, how are you performing compared to the restaurant next door? We don't do that, we can't do that, and actually we promise not to do that. They have a very different position where they do see the market and that data is really valuable. Our retail partners share all of their SKU data, and we agree, kind of like Salesforce, not to share it with anyone else. So we can't tell them how they're performing in the market, but we do give them tools to learn about their customers, then communicate back more effectively, whether it's through email or through their own mobile app. So we use iBeacon and Bluetooth when a customer walks in. We can recommend something right in that moment, or on an email receipt or email marketing or really anywhere else. The point is our tools enable them to deliver really relevant content.
Mm-hmm. So that's looking toward the future a little bit more, but it is rolling out today. Yeah, I mean, you have...
Yeah, everything I'm describing is live today with our partners.
Great. So let's talk a little bit. We only have about a few minutes left, but one of the the elephant in the room, I suppose, is something like an Apple Pay. When people think about payments, not only is there Apple Pay, but we've got Google Wallet now, Android Pay, we've got Samsung Pay. Basically, the idea of integrated payment systems that sit on your phone. One of the things that I'm curious about is to what extent you guys perceive that as a collaborative opportunity, and to what extent do you perceive it as a threat. I would think, Krish, from your point of view, it doesn't really matter where the payments are coming from. It could be the phone, it could be point of sale. You've got the data, and you're processing the transaction.
And we like that a lot in the sense that, I feel that, all the new forms of payment, at the end of the day, if it makes it more convenient to the consumer and if it makes it more relevant and more purposeful for it, we support all of them. We were one of the launch partners for both Apple Pay and Samsung Pay. And we welcome that because if more of transactions move away from cash towards electronic forms of payment, then that's a good thing for us. And so we feel that all of these form factors will open great opportunities to entrepreneurs and everyone else to rethink the whole experience. Just like if you look at the Uber experience, there was a comment on that earlier this morning where payment is not even part of the experience. You order it, you get picked up, you get dropped off, and then payments automatically happen in the background. The same thing should happen in retail also. And it's, where it's not an explicit activity that you got to stand in line, you got to scan all your products, pay, and those types of things, where if new experiences are created as a result of these form factors, I think that's a good thing for all of us.
And transaction data is the same regardless, so it doesn't matter.
But there is a nuance though, and I think it's for the better, because one of the things that Apple Pay and others are helping towards is tokenization, where there's a lot of thought and analysis, especially given the highly publicized breaches that have happened over the course of the last year. A lot of emphasis is being put in. These form factors are inherently much more secure than handing out your credit card to a clerk at a restaurant or a retail shop. And so that also will drive the adoption. A lot of these will bring more sort of satisfaction and to the consumers and as well as the retailers.
So if there's a consumer perception that privacy is a great, is a strong suit of Apple Pay, then they may be more likely to engage.
Absolutely, because one thing that we absolutely make sure that the privacy of the consumer as well as the confidentiality of the merchant is always maintained at any point in time. In fact, like for us, a consumer is a 16-digit ID. We don't care. We don't want to know the identity of the consumer.
Right.
And it's all about enabling the merchant to better understand and serve their customer base. If the merchant has the identity of the consumer that they have acquired through other means, whether the loyalty program or any other program that they have opted in, then it just makes the experience, we enable the experience to be a lot more richer between the merchant and the consumer and provide that intelligence. But for our purposes, for everything that we do, we don't really care about the identity of the consumer.
Right. So, Marc, how do you see Index in connection with a company like Apple Pay? Because one of the things I could perceive as a competitive threat would be that lots of branded retailers are going to kind of get folded into Apple Passbook, and there's going to be less of an opportunity to create a separate branded experience with the retailers that you serve. Is that a threat, or do you guys play along with them?
Yeah, no, we're psyched about Apple Pay and Google Wallet and everything else. I think that, like First Data and like Krish said, we're agnostic about how you pay. It doesn't matter. I think, the way historically retailers have solved identity is with loyalty cards. They've said, carry this extra card. And most of our partners actually don't have loyalty programs in a traditional sense. What we want to do is say, hey, instead of introducing a new ID, let's just understand what you have. Let's understand your credit card, your debit card. Okay, you tap your phone, here's your email. Then let's communicate through these organic channels where you're already engaged. Why introduce new complexity when, if we're smart about it, we can just leverage the tools, the payment, the channels that are already there, and just communicate with you really seamlessly. We need to have customer opt-in. We need to be respectful of privacy. I think that, you know, Apple has been very, very strong in saying, we don't know what you spend, where you bought it, or what you bought. I think that's kind of double-edged. If you think about the content of a wallet, shouldn't it have receipts? So, you know, I think that they've got some road to navigate going forward, but I think that there's some great security improvements with Apple Pay. And, you know, with EMV and other things that are happening, we're going to see really improved merchant acceptance as well.
Excellent. Well, we're just about out of time. I'd like to thank our panelists for a great discussion. Thanks, Marc. Thanks, Krish. Thank you very much.
Thank you.